Malik Thompson had always preferred to stay invisible. At 12 years old, he believed that keeping his head down and avoiding trouble was the safest way to survive middle school. But when his best friend Jamal became the latest target of the school's biggest bully, Dante, Malik's quiet life took a sharp turn. In a split-second decision, he stood up for Jamal, challenging Dante in a way that no one had dared before. That one act of courage set off a chain reaction Malik never could have imagined, drawing unlikely allies, igniting a movement among his classmates, and slowly transforming their school into a place where kindness and community reigned. But with Dante refusing to back down, Malik would have to dig deeper than he ever thought possible to protect his friend, his school, and the change they had fought so hard to build. What started as a single act of bravery became a powerful journey of friendship, resilience, and change. Follow Malik's story and discover how one voice and one choice can truly change everything. It was a crisp autumn morning, and Malik could feel the tension in the air as he trudged down the narrow sidewalk leading to his school. In his small town, fall usually brought a sense of calm, with the golden leaves swirling down and the sky a pale, soft blue. But today felt different. The anxiety was like a rock in his stomach, heavy and unmovable. Malik, a boy of 12, with thoughtful brown eyes and a quiet, steady way about him, didn't draw much attention to himself. He preferred it that way, staying under the radar, invisible to the chaos that often swept through the school halls. Except that today it felt like the school day was creeping toward a storm, and that storm had everything to do with his friend Jamal. Jamal was Malik's best friend and probably his only real friend, the kind of person who didn't seem to mind Malik's quietness. Jamal was a few inches shorter than Malik, with a constant smile that seemed out of place on someone who got picked on as much as he did. Jamal wore second-hand clothes that didn't always fit quite right, his backpack was patched and worn, and he was as introverted as Malik, which made him an easy target. "Hey, Malik!" Jamal's voice cut through Malik's thoughts as he hurried to catch up. His smile was as bright as ever, but Malik noticed a faint bruise forming under Jamal's right eye. "What happened?" Malik stopped in his tracks, concern filling his eyes as he studied his friend's face. "Oh, nothing," Jamal shrugged, attempting to brush it off. But his smile faded slightly, and his gaze dropped to the ground. "You know, nothing doesn't usually leave a bruise." Malik's voice was soft but unwavering. He knew Jamal hated drawing attention to his problems, but Malik was tired of watching his friend pretend to be fine. "It was just Dante and his gang," Jamal admitted finally, his tone a mix of resignation and embarrassment. "They said I was looking at them wrong in gym class." Malik's fists clenched at his sides, his fingers curling tightly until his knuckles turned white. He knew all about Dante, everyone did. Dante was the kid no one wanted to cross. Taller and meaner than most of the boys in their grade, he had a way of turning even the smallest look into an excuse for bullying. And with his friends backing him up, Dante didn't hold back. Malik felt a wave of anger and helplessness rise inside him, an all too familiar feeling. "They have no right to mess with you," Malik said firmly, looking Jamal straight in the eyes. "We have to do something." Jamal's eyes widened slightly in surprise. Malik wasn't usually this outspoken. He was always the one reminding Jamal to keep a low profile, to avoid causing any trouble. But there was something different about Malik's expression today. A spark of determination that Jamal hadn't seen before. "Yeah, but what can we do? I mean, it's Dante and his crew. It's not like the teachers care." Jamal's voice was quiet, barely audible over the rustling leaves as they continued walking. "Besides, They'll just find a reason to come after you if you stand up for me." Malik's mind was racing. He knew Jamal was right. There were plenty of reasons to keep his head down. But the thought of watching Jamal endure another day of taunts, of being humiliated and hurt, made something snap inside him. He didn't care about the consequences. He couldn't stand by any longer. "Look, I don't have a lot of friends," Malik said, his voice steady despite the nervous flutter in his chest. "But you're my best friend, and friends, they're supposed to stick up for each other." Jamal's face softened, a glimmer of gratitude in his eyes. But before he could respond, Malik noticed a group of boys lingering at the entrance of the school. There was Dante, smirking and gesturing to his friends as they leaned against the wall, blocking the doorway. Malik's heart pounded faster, and he felt a knot tighten in his stomach. They hadn't even made it inside, and the trouble was already starting. "Stay close," Malik whispered to Jamal, determination settling over his features. "We're getting inside together." As they approached, Dante's smirk widened. "Well, look who's decided to show up," he sneered, glancing between Malik and Jamal. "And here I was thinking you two had finally decided to skip." Malik felt his body tense, his pulse racing as he met Dante's gaze, refusing to look away. "Let us through, Dante," he said, his voice firmer than he felt inside. Dante's eyebrows shot up, clearly amused by Malik's newfound bravery. "Oh, look, little Malik's got some guts today. What are you, Jamal's personal bodyguard now?" Dante laughed, nudging one of his friends, who chuckled along, adding to the humiliation that felt almost tangible in the chilly morning air. "Just leave us alone," Malik said, holding his ground, despite the doubts gnawing at him. He could feel Jamal standing close, the unspoken support giving him a sense of strength he didn't know he had. Dante's expression darkened, the playful smirk replaced by something colder, more threatening. He stepped closer, towering over Malik, his eyes narrowing. "Or what?" he challenged, his voice a low, dangerous whisper. Malik swallowed, resisting the urge to back down, to look away. He didn't know what would happen next, but he knew he couldn't let Dante win, not this time. His heart raced, the fear pressing down on him, but he held his ground, refusing to let Dante intimidate him. "You heard him," a voice broke through, surprising both Malik and Dante. Malik glanced around, realizing it came from a small group of classmates who had stopped to watch the standoff. One of them, Trina, a girl with a fierce reputation of her own, stepped forward, arms crossed. "Why don't you leave them alone for once, Dante?" Dante's gaze flickered, caught off guard by the unexpected support. His smirk faltered, and for the briefest moment Malik saw uncertainty in his eyes. But just as quickly, Dante regained his composure, rolling his eyes and muttering, "Whatever." With a dismissive wave, he stepped aside, motioning to his friends to follow him as he sauntered away, still casting a threatening look over his shoulder. Malik felt the tension drain from his body, his shoulders relaxing as he let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. He looked over at Jamal, who was watching him with an expression that mixed admiration with relief. "Thanks, Malik," Jamal murmured, his voice barely above a whisper. Malik nodded, the reality of what he'd done starting to sink in. He didn't feel like a hero. He felt scared and a little sick. But as he looked at Jamal's grateful face, he knew one thing. He'd do it all over again if it meant keeping his friends safe. Malik and Jamal made their way through the school hall in silence. Malik could feel the eyes of his classmates following him, whispers already beginning to buzz as they walked by. He'd never been the type to want attention, and his pulse was still racing from the standoff with Dante. But his determination remained firm. He had done the right thing, and he could tell from the way Jamal walked beside him, a little straighter, a little more sure of himself, that it had made a difference. The first period bell rang, and the day swept them into the usual routine of classes, assignments, and hurried notes. Yet Malik couldn't shake the tension. He could sense Dante's anger festering just under the surface, waiting to strike back at him and Jamal when they were least expecting it. Every now and then, he would catch Dante's gaze across the room, the anger in his eyes like a silent promise. Malik tried to focus on the day's lessons, but the weight of the morning's confrontation hung over him like a dark cloud. At lunchtime, Malik and Jamal found their usual spot outside, a small bench beneath an old tree on the far edge of the school grounds. It was a quiet place where they often ate together, away from the crowded tables and prying eyes. Today, though, there was a tension in the air that made even their secluded spot feel exposed. "You didn't have to do that, you know," Jamal said finally, breaking the silence as he unwrapped his sandwich. "Standing up to Dante, I mean." "Maybe not," Malik replied, shrugging. "But somebody had to." Jamal's expression softened. "You're the only one who ever tries to help. Most people just ignore it or act like it's not happening." Malik looked down, feeling a strange mix of pride and discomfort. It just didn't feel right, letting him get away with it again. They ate in silence for a few minutes, the sounds of distant laughter and chatter filling the air from the other side of the field. Malik knew the peace wouldn't last. Standing up to Dante was going to bring consequences. It was only a matter of time. As they finished eating, Jamal's gaze shifted behind Malik, and his eyes widened. Malik turned, his stomach twisting, as he saw Dante and his group walking toward them, expressions dark and determined. Malik's heart thudded in his chest, but he steadied himself, telling himself to stay calm. Dante stopped a few feet away, his hands in his pockets, as he gave Malik a slow, mocking smile. "Nice show you put on this morning," he sneered. "Real brave. Malik, you trying to be some kind of hero?" Malik met his gaze, doing his best to keep his voice steady. "Just trying to stand up for what's right." "Oh, you think you're better than us now?" Dante's voice dropped to a menacing whisper as he leaned in, his eyes narrowing. "You think you can just waltz in and tell us what to do?" Malik felt his throat tighten, but he held his ground, refusing to look away. Jamal shifted beside him, his own fear evident, but Malik could feel the unspoken support radiating from his friend. "Leave us alone, Dante," Malik said firmly, his voice steady despite the fear gnawing at him. Dante let out a low chuckle, glancing at his friends, who laughed along with him, their laughter harsh and echoing in the quiet space. "Sure," he said finally, smirking as he backed away. "I'll leave you alone, for now." He and his group turned and walked back toward the school, their laughter fading as they disappeared around the corner. Malik felt the tension drain from his body, his muscles relaxing only after Dante was out of sight. Jamal looked at Malik, his expression a mix of fear and gratitude. "Are you okay?" "Yeah," Malik replied, though he wasn't sure if he was telling the truth. He'd never felt so on edge before, but he didn't regret a thing. For once in his life, he was standing up for something that mattered. As they gathered their things and headed back toward the school building, Malik knew that this was only the beginning. Standing up to Dante today was a choice he'd made, but it was a choice that came with a price. He just hoped he had the strength to keep paying it. The rest of the day, Malik couldn't shake the sense of foreboding that lingered around him like a shadow. Every hallway, every class, he was hyper-aware of Dante and his crew lurking nearby. He knew they were watching, waiting for a moment when he let his guard down. The whispers from classmates who'd witnessed the morning's confrontation had spread like wildfire, and by lunchtime it seemed everyone had an opinion. "Did you hear? Malik actually stood up to Dante." He overheard one student murmur to another, their voices a mix of shock and awe. Malik kept his head down, feeling a mix of pride and discomfort. He had wanted to help Jamal, but he hadn't expected this wave of attention that made him feel like a fish in a tank under the scrutiny of hundreds of eyes. By the time he reached his last class, Malik's nerves were stretched thin. As he took his seat, he noticed a few kids giving him looks that were almost encouraging, a rarity in the days when everyone kept their distance. Malik tried to focus, but his mind kept drifting to Jamal and the next move Dante would make. Dante wasn't the kind of guy to let things go. He'd strike back. It was only a matter of when. After the final bell rang, Malik packed up his things slowly, hoping that if he took his time, Dante and his friends would leave first. But when he finally stepped out of the classroom, there they were, waiting in the hallway like wolves on the hunt. Malik's pulse quickened. Jamal, who had been waiting for him outside the door, immediately tensed, glancing nervously at Malik. "We should go," Jamal whispered, but Malik saw that it was too late. Dante and his crew had already spotted them, and Dante's smirk was unmistakable. "Well, if it isn't Malik the hero," Dante sneered, stepping forward with a slow, menacing swagger. His friends closed in, forming a semicircle around Malik and Jamal. The hallway was quieter now, most students having already left, which made the silence that filled the space feel ominous. "Let us through, Dante," Malik said, doing his best to keep his voice steady. But he could hear the slight tremor and hoped Dante wouldn't notice. Dante let out a mocking laugh, his eyes glinting with cruel amusement. "Look at this," he drawled to his friends. "Malik thinks he can tell me what to do now. What? You think just because you put on a little show in the morning that you're better than me?" Malik's hands clenched into fists, his heart pounding. He knew that if he showed any sign of fear, it would only make things worse. "I don't think I'm better than anyone," he said evenly. "I just don't think you have the right to push people around." Dante's face twisted into a snarl. "Push people around," he spat, taking a step closer until he was nearly nose to nose with Malik. "I can do whatever I want, and you're nothing. You and your little friend here," he added, throwing a contemptuous glance at Jamal. Malik's breath hitched, and he felt the familiar urge to back down, to say whatever it would take to make Dante leave them alone. But he resisted it, forcing himself to hold Dante's gaze, even as his stomach twisted with fear. "You can say what you want, Dante," Malik replied, his voice barely above a whisper. "But you know what? People see you for what you really are." Dante's eyes flared with anger, his face turning red. Malik braced himself, his heart pounding so hard he could hear it in his ears, but he refused to look away. For a long moment the hallway was silent, tension thick in the air. Malik half expected Dante to throw a punch or shove him against the lockers, but instead Dante let out a harsh laugh, stepping back. "Fine," Dante sneered. "You think you're so brave? Let's see how brave you are tomorrow." With that, he turned on his heel, his friends following him down the hallway, their laughter echoing off the walls. Malik watched them go, his heart racing. He could feel Jamal's gaze on him, a mixture of admiration and concern in his eyes. That was brave," Jamal said, his voice trembling slightly. "But you know he's not going to let this go, right?" Malik nodded, swallowing the knot of fear in his throat. "I know," he said quietly, "but I'm tired of letting him walk all over us." As they walked out of school together, Malik couldn't shake the dread that settled over him like a dark cloud. He had crossed a line, and he knew it. Dante wouldn't stop now, but even as he felt the weight of that decision, a part of him felt strangely relieved, almost liberated. He was finally standing up for something, even if it meant facing the consequences. The next morning, Malik woke up early, the events of the previous day still fresh in his mind. He knew he had a choice to make. He could take a different route to school, avoid the places where Dante usually hung out, try to slip under the radar again. But Malik was tired of running. He was tired of feeling afraid. He made up his mind that today he was going to walk through the front doors with his head held high. As he walked to school, he felt a surge of nervous energy course through him. He was half expecting Dante and his friends to ambush him before he even reached the school grounds, but to his surprise, they were nowhere in sight. The hallways, usually full of chatter and laughter, felt strangely quiet as he made his way to his locker. Jamal found him a few minutes later, a look of relief and worry on his face. "I didn't think you'd come today," Jamal admitted. "After what happened." "I'm not going to let Dante scare me away," Malik replied firmly. He felt a surge of courage just from saying the words out loud. It was as if he was finally giving voice to the resolve that had been growing inside him for days. They went through their morning classes without any sign of trouble, and Malik began to wonder if maybe, just maybe, Dante had decided to let it go. But that hope was shattered at lunchtime. Malik and Jamal were sitting at their usual bench talking quietly when a sudden hush fell over the nearby tables. Malik looked up, his heart sinking as he saw Dante approaching with a few of his friends. They walked with a confidence that set everyone on edge, their faces a mixture of arrogance and disdain. "Still playing hero, Malik?" Dante sneered as he approached, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "Or did you finally realize how out of your league you are?" Malik's hands clenched into fists, but he forced himself to stay calm. "I'm not playing anything, Dante," he said, his voice steady. "I'm just tired of you treating people like they don't matter." Dante's face twisted with anger, and he took a step closer, invading Malik's personal space. "You don't get it, do you?" he hissed. "I run things around here, and if you don't want to get hurt, you'll stay out of my way." Malik felt a surge of fear, but he also felt something else, a quiet, steady resolve. He was done letting Dante intimidate him. He glanced around, noticing a few other students watching the confrontation with wide eyes. Some of them looked sympathetic, others afraid. But in that moment, Malik realized he wasn't just standing up for himself and Jamal. He was standing up for all of them. "Maybe you do run things around here," Malik said softly. "But that doesn't mean you're right." Dante stared at him, a flicker of doubt crossing his face. But before he could respond, one of his friends muttered something under his breath, drawing Dante's attention away. With a final glare, Dante turned and walked away, leaving Malik and Jamal standing alone, the silence around them thick with tension. Malik let out a shaky breath, his heart pounding. He had faced down Dante once again, and this time he knew he was in it for the long haul. The tension from the confrontation hung over Malik and Jamal for the rest of the day, trailing them like an invisible shadow. In every class, Malik felt the weight of Dante's unspoken threats pressing down on him. But Malik forced himself to keep his head up, repeating to himself that standing up for what was right was worth it. Jamal, meanwhile, seemed buoyed by Malik's courage, walking a little straighter and meeting Malik's gaze with a look of gratitude that said more than words ever could. After school, Malik and Jamal headed out together, hoping to avoid Dante and his gang. They kept to a quiet side street that led them past a row of small shops and an old park. It wasn't the fastest way home, but it was the safest, and for once, they enjoyed a moment of calm. Jamal hesitated, breaking the silence. "Malik, I know this has been hard, but thanks for everything. I don't know if I could have handled all this without you." Malik looked at his friend, surprised by the raw honesty in Jamal's voice. "You don't have to thank me, Jamal. Friends look out for each other. Besides, I couldn't just sit back and let them keep treating you that way. It's not fair." Jamal nodded, his eyes reflecting a mixture of relief and admiration. "I just hope you don't regret it," he said quietly. They walked in silence for a few more blocks, the sounds of the town growing faint behind them. Malik thought about Jamal's words, wondering if he'd be able to keep his promise. He was willing to face Dante if he had to, but part of him couldn't help feeling afraid of what might happen next. Just as they reached the edge of the park, a voice cut through the air, sharp and mocking. "Hey, look who's sneaking around like scared little rabbits!" Malik and Jamal froze, turning slowly. Dante and two of his friends were leaning against a park bench, their faces twisted into sneers as they watched Malik and Jamal from across the path. Malik's heart pounded in his chest, but he stood his ground, refusing to let Dante see his fear. "What do you want, Dante?" Malik asked, forcing his voice to stay steady. Dante grinned, pushing off the bench and sauntering over, his friends trailing behind him. "I want to make sure you know what happens to people who try to mess with me," he said, his voice low and dangerous. Jamal took a small step back, his eyes darting to Malik as if to gauge his reaction. Malik felt a surge of protectiveness rise in him. He couldn't let Dante scare Jamal any more than he already had. "Leave us alone, Dante," Malik said firmly. "We're not looking for trouble." Dante chuckled darkly. "Too late for that, hero boy. You already made it my business when you decided to play protector." He moved closer, his face inches from Malik's, his breath hot and heavy. Malik clenched his fists, feeling his heart race as adrenaline pumped through him. He knew Dante wanted him to back down, to show weakness. But Malik met his gaze, refusing to look away, even as fear clawed at him from the inside. "What's the matter, hero?" Dante taunted. "You scared?" Malik swallowed, his throat dry. But instead of answering, he held Dante's gaze, his silence a small act of defiance. Dante's smirk faltered, frustration flickering across his face. Malik saw a flash of anger in his eyes, and he braced himself for what was coming. Without warning, Dante shoved Malik, sending him stumbling back. Malik caught himself, his body tense as he steadied his balance, his eyes still locked on Dante. He could see the surprise in Dante's expression, as if he hadn't expected Malik to hold his ground. "Just leave us alone," Malik said, his voice quieter but no less firm. Dante scoffed, his friends exchanging glances behind him. For a moment, it looked like he might press the attack further, but then he seemed to think better of it. "Fine," he sneered. "Run along, hero boy, but don't think this is over." With a final glare, Dante turned and walked away, his friends trailing after him. Malik watched them go, relief flooding him as the tension slowly drained from his body. Jamal let out a shaky breath, his shoulders relaxing as he glanced at Malik. "That was intense," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Malik nodded, the weight of the confrontation settling over him. "Yeah," he replied quietly, "but it was worth it." The next few days were filled with an uneasy calm. Malik and Jamal kept a low profile, avoiding the hallways and spots where Dante and his friends usually hung out. Malik felt a strange mix of relief and anxiety every time they managed to avoid a confrontation. He knew it couldn't last forever, but for now, he was grateful for the reprieve. One afternoon, Malik caught sight of a flyer on the school bulletin board. It was an announcement for a student council meeting that would be discussing ways to improve the school environment. Malik's heart skipped a beat. An idea began to form in his mind, an idea that felt bold, maybe even a little crazy, but also strangely right. The meeting was scheduled for the following week, and Malik decided he would go. He didn't tell Jamal at first, afraid his friend might think he was getting in over his head. But as the day of the meeting approached, he gathered his courage and told Jamal his plan. "You're going to speak at the student council meeting." Jamal's eyes were wide with surprise. "Malik, are you sure that's a good idea?" Malik took a deep breath, nodding. "I think it's worth a try. The principal and teachers keep saying they want to make the school a better place, but nothing ever changes. Maybe if enough of us speak up, they'll finally listen." Jamal looked skeptical, but there was a spark of admiration in his gaze. "That's really brave, Malik. I'm proud of you." The words warmed Malik's heart, giving him the extra courage he needed. He knew he couldn't keep relying on confrontations with Dante. There had to be a better way to make lasting change, and maybe, just maybe, this meeting could be the first step. The day of the student council meeting arrived, and Malik found himself sitting in a crowded room filled with students, teachers, and administrators. His heart raced as he glanced around, recognizing a few familiar faces in the crowd. Jamal sat beside him, giving him a small nod of encouragement. The meeting began with the usual announcements, the council members discussing recent activities and events. Malik listened, his nerves mounting as he waited for the chance to speak. Finally, the council president opened the floor for comments, inviting students to share their ideas. Malik took a deep breath, his hands trembling slightly as he raised his hand. "Yes, Malik," the council president said, giving him a nod. Malik stood up, his heart pounding. He could feel every eye in the room on him, the weight of expectation heavy on his shoulders, but he forced himself to focus, his thoughts clear and steady. "I wanted to talk about bullying," he began, his voice a little shaky at first. "A lot of us face it every day, and it feels like no one really does anything about it. We've tried talking to teachers, but sometimes it feels like we're not being heard." He paused, glancing at Jamal, who gave him an encouraging nod. Malik continued, his confidence growing as he spoke. "We need a place where we feel safe, where we don't have to worry about being picked on or hurt just for showing up. Maybe there's a way to make that happen, like a peer support group or some kind of system where we can help each other stand up to bullies." The room was silent, the impact of Malik's words settling over the crowd. He saw a few heads nodding in agreement, and a flicker of hope ignited in his chest. One of the teachers raised her hand, her expression thoughtful. "That's an excellent suggestion, Malik. I think it's something we should definitely consider." Malik felt a surge of relief, his nerves giving way to a feeling of accomplishment. For the first time, he felt like he was making a difference, that his voice mattered. Jamal smiled beside him, pride shining in his eyes. As the meeting ended, a few students came up to Malik, expressing their support and admiration. Malik felt a warmth spread through him, the weight of his fears lifting as he realized he wasn't alone. There were others who wanted change, who believed in making the school a better place for everyone. When he and Jamal walked out of the meeting, Malik felt lighter than he had in weeks. He knew there were still challenges ahead, and Dante would undoubtedly try to make his life difficult. But now, Malik had something stronger than fear. He had hope and the support of people who believed in him. And for the first time, Malik truly believed he could make a difference. Over the next few days, Malik felt a growing sense of purpose. The student council had embraced his idea, and a small team of students, some he barely knew, began working with him to organize a peer support group. Malik and Jamal met with teachers who seemed genuinely interested, and even the principal, Mr. Hughes, took notice. This newfound support buoyed Malik, and he felt more confident than he ever had. Yet a lingering worry remained: Dante and his crew. They hadn't approached Malik since that tense confrontation in the park, but he knew better than to assume that Dante had let it go. It was almost worse, not knowing when or where Dante might retaliate. Malik found himself scanning hallways and watching over his shoulder as he moved from class to class, always ready for an ambush that might or might not come. One day after school, Malik and Jamal stayed late to meet with their growing support group, brainstorming ideas for how they could tackle bullying and create a safer school environment. The group decided on regular meetings where students could talk openly about their struggles and find allies willing to stand with them against intimidation. As they wrapped up, Malik looked around at the faces of his new friends and allies. A girl named Trina, who had stood up for him and Jamal in the cafeteria, gave him a smile. She had become one of the group's strongest supporters, her courage infectious and unwavering. "We're making something real here, Malik," she said, as they packed up their notes. "People want this, more than I realized." Malik nodded, feeling the weight of what they were building. It was more than just standing up to Dante. It was about creating a place where no one would have to feel like he and Jamal had felt, isolated and afraid. Jamal grinned, nudging Malik's shoulder as they walked out. "Can you believe this? We've got a whole team now. People actually want to listen to us." Malik felt warmth spread through his chest. "It feels, I don't know, like we're finally part of something that matters." But as they exited the school's side door and stepped into the cool evening air, that warmth quickly faded. Malik's stomach dropped when he saw Dante and his friends leaning against the school fence, clearly waiting for them. Malik's mind raced, but he kept his face steady. He couldn't show fear now, not with Jamal and Trina beside him. Well, if it isn't the school's newest celebrities," Dante sneered, stepping forward with a menacing grin. His friends fanned out around him, forming a half-circle that trapped Malik, Jamal, and Trina between the fence and the looming figures of Dante's gang. Trina, to Malik's surprise, crossed her arms and faced Dante without a hint of fear. "What do you want, Dante? We're done listening to you." Dante's smirk faltered slightly, but he quickly recovered. "Oh, you think you're so tough now, don't you, Trina? I heard you've been hanging around with these losers. Guess it doesn't take much to impress you." "Calling us names won't make you look any tougher, Dante," Malik said, his voice steady. "We're not here to fight you." "Oh, but I think you are." Dante took another step forward, his eyes narrowing. "You and your little support group. You think you're all better than us, huh? Think you can just change things?" Malik didn't back down, though his heart was pounding. "It's not about being better. It's about doing what's right." Dante laughed, a harsh, mocking sound. "You really think you're some kind of hero, don't you? Well, I'm here to remind you who's really in charge." Before Malik could react, Dante shoved him hard against the fence, his hands twisted in Malik's shirt as he pulled him close. "You don't belong here," he hissed, his voice filled with venom. "You think people like you are going to change anything? You're nothing, Malik. You're just a weak little kid trying to act tough." Malik felt the familiar surge of fear, but he forced himself to stay calm, meeting Dante's gaze with a look of quiet defiance. "Maybe I'm not as strong as you," he said softly, "but I'm not alone." As if on cue, Jamal stepped forward, his voice steady despite the fear in his eyes. "You're wrong, Dante. Malik's not weak, and neither are the rest of us. We're not afraid of you anymore." Trina chimed in, her voice firm. "You're just a bully, Dante, and people are finally tired of letting you push them around." Dante's grip tightened, his face twisted in rage, but before he could say anything, a group of other students appeared around the corner. Some of them were members of Malik's support group, others were classmates who had heard about the confrontation. They stopped, taking in the scene with expressions of shock and determination. It was clear that if Dante did anything now, he'd be facing the eyes and judgment of more than just Malik and his friends. Dante looked around, realization dawning as he took in the growing crowd. His confidence faltered, his sneer turning to something closer to fear as he noticed that no one was stepping in to defend him. "You think you're all so brave," he muttered, his voice low and bitter. "Fine, have it your way, but don't think I'm done with you." He released Malik's shirt and pushed him back against the fence one last time before turning on his heel, his friends trailing after him in silence. The group of students watched him go, their expressions a mixture of relief and satisfaction. Malik felt Jamal's hand on his shoulder, grounding him as he steadied himself. His heart was racing, but he felt stronger than ever, the faces of his classmates filling him with a newfound courage. He was no longer just one kid standing up to a bully. He was part of something larger, a movement that wouldn't back down. Trina looked at him, her eyes shining with pride. "That was incredible, Malik. You didn't give in, even when he tried to intimidate you." Malik managed a shaky smile, the adrenaline slowly fading from his body. "I couldn't have done it alone. You guys being here, it made all the difference." Jamal nodded, a grin spreading across his face. "We're in this together, Malik. No one's standing alone anymore." As they walked home, Malik felt a sense of accomplishment that ran deeper than anything he'd felt before. The school was starting to change, bit by bit, and he was part of that change. For the first time in his life, he felt truly empowered, his voice no longer silenced by fear or self-doubt. The next day, whispers of the confrontation spread through the school like wildfire. Students who had once avoided Malik and Jamal were now offering them nods of respect in the hallways. Teachers who had once been distant were now openly supporting Malik's efforts, encouraging him and his friends to keep going. Even Mr. Hughes, the principal, pulled Malik aside to commend him for his bravery. "Malik," he said, his tone warm and sincere, "you're setting a powerful example for everyone here. I'm proud of you. The work you're doing matters, and I want you to know that you have my full support." Malik's chest swelled with pride. He could hardly believe how much things had changed in just a few short weeks. What had started as a desperate attempt to stand up for his friend had grown into a movement that was transforming the entire school. At the next peer support meeting, the room was packed, filled with students who wanted to share their stories, their struggles, and their hopes for a better school environment. Malik listened as each person spoke, his heart swelling with pride and gratitude. They weren't just talking about bullying, they were talking about resilience, about the courage to stand up for themselves and each other. When it was his turn to speak, Malik stood up, glancing around the room at the faces that had once been strangers, but now felt like family. "We've all been through a lot," he began, his voice steady and filled with conviction. "But together we're stronger, and we're not just going to sit back and let things stay the same. We're going to make this a place where everyone feels safe, where everyone has someone to stand with them." The room erupted in applause, the energy electric and inspiring. Malik looked over at Jamal, who was clapping and beaming with pride, and felt his heart swell. This was what they had fought for, what they had risked everything to achieve, a community that stood together, undivided and unbreakable. As he looked around the room, Malik knew that the fight wasn't over. Dante might still try to intimidate them, and there would be other challenges to face. But for the first time, Malik was certain that they could handle anything that came their way. He wasn't just standing up to a bully, he was building something lasting, something that would change lives long after he and Jamal had left this school. And he knew, deep in his heart, that he'd found a purpose he could carry with him for the rest of his life. The days following the peer support meeting were unlike anything Malik had ever experienced. The school felt different, lighter somehow. Malik noticed that students he'd never spoken to before were now nodding in greeting, offering shy but genuine smiles. A few even approached him directly, thanking him for giving them a voice. For years, kids had been bullied, mocked, and silenced, but now they felt seen, valued, and, most importantly, connected. Malik was beginning to realize the strength of the community he'd helped to create. But it wasn't just Malik who was stepping up. Jamal, who had once shied away from attention, was showing a new level of confidence. He began sharing his own experiences at meetings, encouraging others to speak out. His friendship with Malik had transformed him, and now Jamal's voice was inspiring others to come forward. Together they were beginning to see the change they had dreamed of. Still, despite the progress, Malik couldn't shake the feeling that Dante wasn't finished with them. There had been no sign of him in recent days, no taunting glances in the hallways, no sneers thrown Malik's way. But that silence felt ominous, like the stillness before a storm. Malik knew Dante well enough to understand that he wouldn't let go of his dominance so easily. Malik was proven right one afternoon after school. He and Jamal had stayed late to help a teacher prepare a presentation for the next peer meeting. As they were leaving, Malik noticed a figure lurking by the bike racks just outside the side entrance. His stomach sank as he recognized Dante, his face shadowed but unmistakably hostile. Malik felt Jamal's hand tighten around his arm as they exchanged a glance, each silently bracing for what might come next. Dante stepped forward, blocking their path. "So, looks like you and your little group think you run this school now, huh?" He sneered, his voice laced with bitterness. "You think a few meetings will change anything?" Malik took a deep breath, doing his best to stay calm. "It already has," he replied quietly. "People aren't afraid of you anymore, Dante. They're standing together." Dante's face twisted, his eyes flashing with anger. "Oh, really? So you think you're a hero now? Think you're some kind of savior?" "It's not about being a hero," Malik said, his voice steady. "It's about not letting people like you make everyone else feel small. People deserve to feel safe here." Dante's smirk vanished, replaced by an expression of pure rage. He took a threatening step forward, his fists clenched at his sides. Malik felt a surge of fear, but held his ground, refusing to back down. "You think you're so smart, don't you?" Dante growled. "Well, let's see how tough you are when there's no crowd around to back you up." Jamal, who had been silent until now, stepped forward, positioning himself between Malik and Dante. "You don't scare us, Dante," he said, his voice trembling slightly, but resolute. "We're done letting you push us around." Dante glared at Jamal, his face twisted with contempt. "Stay out of this, Jamal. This doesn't concern you." "It does," Jamal replied, his voice gaining strength. "Malik's my friend, and I'm not letting you do this to him, or to anyone else." Dante's fists tightened, and for a moment Malik thought he might strike. But instead, Dante let out a frustrated snarl, kicking the metal bike rack with a loud clang that echoed across the empty courtyard. The anger in his eyes seemed to waver, revealing something else, something that looked like fear. "You'll regret this, Malik," Dante muttered, his voice barely more than a whisper. Then he turned on his heel and stalked away, his footsteps heavy with frustration. As he disappeared from sight, Malik felt the tension in his body finally release, his shoulders relaxing as he let out a long breath. Jamal was still beside him, his face pale but determined. "You okay?" Malik asked, his voice soft with concern. Jamal nodded, though his eyes were wide with lingering fear. "I am now," he said, offering Malik a small, shaky smile. "I never thought I'd actually stand up to him like that." "You were amazing," Malik said, clapping Jamal on the shoulder. "You didn't let him scare you, and that's what he hates the most." Jamal grinned, and for the first time in weeks Malik felt like they'd finally gained the upper hand. Dante's power was crumbling, and Malik knew that he would have to make a choice soon. Either give up his reign of fear or face the consequences of his actions. The following week, Malik and his peer group took another big step. They held their first official school assembly on bullying, gathering all grades in the gymnasium. Malik had spent days preparing for the event, creating a presentation that combined personal stories from students with ideas for fostering respect and inclusivity in the school. He knew that this assembly was their chance to reach even those who hadn't attended their meetings, students who might still be too afraid or unsure to join them, but who needed to hear that they weren't alone. As the students filed into the gym, Malik felt his nerves start to mount. He glanced over at Jamal, who gave him a reassuring nod, and then at Trina, who was already setting up the projector. His friends were here, and their support reminded him why he had started all of this. Mr. Hughes, the principal, began the assembly, speaking briefly about the importance of respect and kindness. Then, with a nod, he handed the microphone to Malik. Malik felt the weight of the entire room's gaze as he stepped up to the podium, his heart pounding in his chest. But he took a steadying breath, reminding himself of the faces that had stood beside him through it all. "Hi, everyone," he began, his voice echoing slightly in the large space. "My name is Malik, and I want to talk to you about something that affects all of us: bullying. It's something that for too long we've been told to ignore, to avoid, or to just accept. But we don't have to accept it. None of us should have to feel afraid to come to school every day." He paused, his gaze sweeping over the crowd, catching glimpses of students listening intently. He could see Jamal and Trina in the front row, their faces filled with pride and encouragement. Malik took strength from their presence, continuing with renewed confidence. "This isn't just about standing up to one person," he said. "It's about standing up for each other. It's about making this school a place where we all feel safe, where we all feel like we belong. And that means we need to look out for one another." He shared a few stories, moments when he and others had felt small, isolated, and helpless. He spoke about how his friends had helped him find courage and how they could all be that kind of friend to someone else. Malik could see some students nodding, others leaning forward with a newfound intensity in their expressions. By the time he finished, the room was buzzing with an energy that felt electric. Malik's words had ignited something, a shared sense of purpose that rippled through the crowd, uniting them in a way he had only hoped for. As he stepped down from the podium, the students burst into applause. Malik felt a rush of pride, overwhelmed by the strength of the community they had built together. It wasn't just him or Jamal or Trina anymore. It was all of them. After the assembly, students approached him one by one, thanking him, sharing their own experiences, and even asking how they could join the group. Malik felt humbled by their trust, knowing that they had found the courage to come forward because they believed in the change he and his friends were working toward. One of the last people to approach him was Dante. Malik felt his heart skip as he saw him standing there, hands shoved deep into his pockets, his face unreadable. He didn't know what to expect, but he forced himself to stand tall, meeting Dante's gaze head-on. Dante hesitated, his eyes flickering with a mix of emotions Malik couldn't quite read. For a moment it looked as though he might say something harsh, but instead he just nodded slowly. "You did good up there," he mumbled, his voice low. "I didn't think you had it in you." Malik was taken aback, his mouth opening in surprise. He hadn't expected anything close to a compliment from Dante. "Thanks," he said, keeping his tone calm though his mind was racing. Dante shifted, glancing away. "Look, I know I've been a jerk. I guess I never really thought about what it felt like for the other side." Malik felt a strange mix of relief and understanding. He could see that Dante was struggling, grappling with something he wasn't used to confronting. "We've all got things to work on," Malik said gently. "But it's not too late to change." Dante nodded, a faint smile touching his lips before he turned and walked away, disappearing into the crowd. Malik watched him go, feeling a spark of hope that maybe, just maybe, things could be different. As he stood there, surrounded by friends and classmates, Malik felt a wave of peace wash over him. They had started something important, something that would last long after the bullies faded and the fear disappeared. He had set out to protect his friend, but he had ended up changing the school, creating a community where everyone had each other's backs. At that moment, Malik knew that they had truly won. In the weeks that followed, the atmosphere at school continued to shift. The peer support group met regularly, expanding with new members who had once been too afraid to speak up. Teachers began to take notice, encouraging open discussions in class and even creating new school policies that emphasized respect and inclusivity. Malik watched it all unfold with a mix of amazement and pride, feeling like he was witnessing the dawn of something genuinely transformative. Yet despite the group's success, Malik sensed a lingering shadow in the hallways. The students who had once followed Dante now avoided him, and Dante himself had withdrawn, his once confident swagger replaced by a sullen silence. Malik hadn't seen Dante attend any more group meetings or school events, and he couldn't shake the feeling that Dante was struggling with something deeper than just the loss of his dominance over his classmates. One afternoon, Malik stayed after school to finish an assignment in the library. As he packed up his things and headed for the exit, he noticed Dante sitting alone at a table near the window. Dante was hunched over, his face partly hidden, his expression troubled. Malik paused, considering whether to approach him or to keep walking. Part of him wanted to ignore Dante. After all, this was the boy who had caused so much pain, who had threatened and intimidated him and his friends. But something tugged at Malik's heart, a reminder of why he'd started this journey in the first place. He took a steadying breath, then walked over, clearing his throat softly. "Hey, Dante," he said, keeping his tone calm and non-threatening. Dante looked up, startled, his eyes narrowing defensively. "What do you want?" he muttered, his voice flat and guarded. "I just saw you sitting here alone. Thought maybe you'd want some company," Malik replied, pulling out a chair and sitting down before Dante could say anything else. Dante's jaw tightened, but he didn't object. He stared out the window, silent and tense. Malik waited patiently, letting the quiet settle around them, sensing that Dante needed time to decide whether he would open up. Finally, Dante let out a sigh, crossing his arms as he leaned back in his chair. "Everyone acts like I'm some kind of monster now," he muttered. "Like I'm not even human." Malik felt a pang of sympathy, despite everything. "I don't think you're a monster, Dante," he he said gently. I think maybe you felt like you had to act tough, like it was the only way to survive here. Dante looked at him sharply, his expression a mix of anger and vulnerability. You think you know me, Malik? You don't know anything about me. Maybe not, Malik admitted. But I know that people don't just become bullies for no reason. There's usually something else going on. Something that makes them feel like they have to hurt others to feel powerful. Dante's gaze softened, a flicker of uncertainty in his eyes. He looked away, swallowing hard. You wouldn't understand, he said, but his voice lacked the usual bite. You have all these people on your side now. You're the hero. Everyone thinks you're perfect. Malik shook his head, leaning forward. I'm not perfect, Dante. I'm just trying to do what's right. And you can too. It's not too late. Dante clenched his jaw, his fists tightening as he wrestled with his emotions. For a moment, Malik thought he would get up and leave, but then Dante's shoulders slumped and his expression crumbled, revealing a hint of the pain he had kept hidden. I don't know how, he whispered, his voice barely audible. Everyone hates me now. Malik reached out, placing a hand on Dante's shoulder. Then maybe start by showing people that you've changed. Actions speak louder than words. If you're willing to try, people will see that. Dante looked at him, uncertainty in his eyes, but also a glimmer of hope. He nodded slowly, his expression softening. Maybe you're right. Malik gave him a reassuring smile. I know it's hard, but we all have to start somewhere. You can come to the next meeting if you want. No one's going to turn you away. Dante seemed to consider it, his gaze thoughtful. I'll think about it. They sat in silence for a while longer, and Malik sensed that something had shifted. He knew Dante's path wouldn't be easy, but this moment felt like a small victory, a first step toward healing the divide that had long plagued their school. As the days went on, Malik continued to focus on the support group, pouring his energy into building a community where every student felt safe and valued. The peer group grew stronger, drawing students who had never felt comfortable sharing their voices before. Some even started mentoring younger students, offering guidance and encouragement, and helping them navigate their own challenges. Jamal, meanwhile, had become an invaluable part of the group. His quiet strength inspired others, and he found himself growing more confident, no longer just Malik's shadow, but a leader in his own right. Malik felt a surge of pride whenever he saw Jamal speak up, knowing how far his friend had come. One afternoon, Malik received a surprising message. Mr. Hughes, the principal, wanted to meet with him in his office after school. Malik couldn't imagine what it could be about, but he arrived promptly, his mind buzzing with curiosity. Thank you for coming, Malik, Mr. Hughes said as Malik sat down across from him. The principal's expression was warm and admiring, a far cry from the stern face Malik had come to associate with authority. I wanted to talk to you about something special, Mr. Hughes began, folding his hands on the desk. Over the past few months, you and your friends have made a tremendous impact here. The students feel safer, and we're seeing a noticeable reduction in bullying incidents. Malik felt a swell of pride, but he remained modest. It wasn't just me, sir. Jamal, Trina, and so many others helped make this happen. Mr. Hughes smiled, nodding. Of course, but every movement needs a leader, and you've taken on that role with courage and integrity. That's why I wanted to ask if you would consider being the keynote speaker at our school's annual community event next month. You'll have the chance to share your story, and it could be an inspiration for so many others. Malik's eyes widened. The idea of speaking to the whole community was both thrilling and terrifying. But as he thought about it, he felt a sense of purpose settle over him, stronger than the fear. "I'd be honored, Mr. Hughes," he replied, his voice filled with determination. The month flew by as Malik prepared his speech, crafting each word carefully to convey the journey he and his friends had taken. He wanted to tell the truth, not just about the pain and fear they had faced, but about the resilience they had discovered within themselves. He wanted the community to understand how powerful it was to stand together, to lift each other up, rather than tear each other down. Finally, the day of the community event arrived. The school gymnasium had been transformed, decorated with streamers and banners that bore messages of hope and unity. Parents, teachers, and students filled the seats, their eyes bright with anticipation. As Malik stepped up to the podium, his heart pounded, but he took a steadying breath, feeling Jamal, Trina, and the rest of his friends watching him from the front row. Their support gave him the courage he needed, and he began to speak, his voice clear and strong. "When I first started at this school, I didn't think my voice mattered. Like a lot of kids, I thought if I stayed quiet, kept my head down, and avoided trouble, maybe things would get better on their own. But they didn't. And it took the strength of my friends to help me see that we don't have to face these things alone. We don't have to be silent." He glanced around, seeing the faces of those who had once ignored him, now listening intently, captivated by his words. "We started something small, a group of people who believed that we could make things better. But it grew. We realized that by standing together, by supporting one another, we could change more than just our own lives. We could change our whole community." Malik spoke about the challenges they had faced, the courage it had taken to confront their fears, and the way they had discovered strength in each other. He saw Jamal smiling, Trina nodding, and even a few of his classmates wiping away tears. "When we believe in each other," Malik said, his voice resonating with conviction, "we become stronger than any bully, stronger than any fear. We are a community, and that means we don't leave anyone behind." When he finished, the gym erupted in applause. Malik looked down, his face flushed with pride and relief as the audience rose to their feet. He felt a powerful sense of accomplishment, knowing that his message had reached them, that maybe, just maybe, this moment would inspire others to make a difference in their own lives. After the event, people approached him one by one, offering their congratulations and sharing how much his speech had meant to them. Parents thanked him for giving their children hope, teachers praised him for his courage, and even students who had once ignored him shook his hand, treating him with newfound respect. As the crowd began to disperse, Malik felt a hand on his shoulder. He turned to find Dante standing there, his expression solemn but sincere. "Malik, I just wanted to say thank you," Dante said, his voice unsteady. "For giving me a chance, for not giving up on me, even when I made it so hard." Malik felt a wave of warmth as he met Dante's gaze, seeing a spark of genuine gratitude in his former adversary's eyes. "Everyone deserves a chance to change," Malik replied with a smile, "and I'm glad you're here with us." They shook hands, a gesture that felt like the closing of one chapter and the beginning of something new. Malik watched Dante walk away, feeling the weight of the past lift from his shoulders. He knew the journey wasn't over, but he felt ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. He had discovered his voice, his purpose, and his strength. And with the support of his friends and community, Malik knew he could create a world where everyone felt seen, safe, and heard. In the weeks following the community event, Malik noticed just how much had changed, both in his own life and throughout the school. Students who had once been afraid of speaking out were now more confident, looking out for each other and challenging unfairness when they saw it. Teachers were visibly more engaged, making a point to check in with students and foster a positive environment. The sense of solidarity and shared purpose that Malik had worked so hard to build now pulsed throughout the entire school. But even as things continued to improve, Malik found himself reflecting on the journey that had brought him here. He realized that as much as he had helped others, he had grown tremendously too. There was a strength within him he hadn't known he possessed, a strength that had emerged only when he stood up for what he believed in. Yet there was something still bothering him, a lingering feeling that he hadn't fully let go of everything that had happened with Dante. One evening, Malik found himself wandering the neighborhood alone, the streets quiet as the last hints of sunset faded. He knew Dante lived nearby, though he wasn't sure if it was the right time to visit. Still, something pulled him forward, as if there were things left unsaid between them. After a few turns, he reached Dante's house and took a deep breath, trying to steady himself as he approached the door. To his surprise, Dante answered almost immediately, looking both surprised and slightly wary. "Malik?" he said, glancing around as if he couldn't quite believe who was standing on his doorstep. "Hey, Dante," Malik said, offering a tentative smile. "I know it's unexpected, but I just wanted to talk, if that's okay." Dante hesitated for a moment, his gaze flickering with uncertainty. But then he nodded, opening the door wider and gesturing for Malik to come in. They walked to the living room, where Dante slumped onto the couch, gesturing for Malik to sit across from him. For a moment, neither of them spoke, the silence filled with memories and unspoken words. Finally, Malik cleared his throat, deciding to go first. "Dante, I just wanted to say that I don't hate you," he said, the words feeling raw and honest. "I know we went through a lot, and I know we didn't get along for a long time, but I don't want to hold on to that. Not anymore." Dante looked at him, surprised, a flicker of relief crossing his face. I didn't expect that. I thought you'd hate me forever." Malik shook his head. "That's not who I want to be. I think part of why all of this happened was because we were all struggling with something. It wasn't just you or me. It was all of us trying to figure out who we were and how we fit in." Dante leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. "You know, you're right. I didn't want to admit it, but I was always angry. At myself, mostly. My dad. He's not exactly easy to live with. He's got his own issues, and I guess I just took it out on everyone around me." Malik felt a pang of sympathy, understanding for the first time just how much pain Dante had been carrying. "We all have our own struggles," he said gently. "But that doesn't mean we have to face them alone." Dante nodded slowly, his gaze fixed on the floor. "I was wrong, Malik, about everything. I thought being tough, being feared, was the only way people would respect me, but all it did was make me feel more alone." Malik reached out, resting a hand on Dante's shoulder. "It takes courage to admit that, and it takes even more to change. But you've already started, I've seen it." Dante gave him a small, hesitant smile. "Thanks, Malik. I don't know if I deserve it, but thank you." As they sat there, Malik felt a sense of closure settling over him. There was no longer any resentment or bitterness, only an understanding that they had both grown from their experiences. The conflict, once so overwhelming, had given way to a mutual respect that felt genuine. They spent a while talking about their lives, their hopes for the future, and their shared determination to make their school a better place. When Malik finally stood to leave, he felt lighter, as if he had let go of the last burden he had been carrying. He could see in Dante's eyes that he felt it too. As the school year moved forward, Malik's support group continued to grow, evolving into a real force for good in the school community. They held regular events, encouraging open conversations and providing support for students facing their own struggles. The group became a safe space where everyone was welcome, and Malik saw firsthand how lives were being changed by the work they were doing. One afternoon, Malik found himself at the front of a packed classroom, leading a session on empathy and kindness. The students listened intently as he spoke about the importance of compassion, about how each small act of kindness could make a world of difference. Sometimes all it takes is one person willing to stand up and say, "This isn't right," Malik said, glancing around the room. One person willing to reach out to help someone else feel seen. And when we start doing that, it spreads. Kindness is powerful. It can change everything. After the session ended, a younger student approached him, looking nervous but determined. "Malik," the boy said, his voice barely above a whisper, "I just wanted to say thank you. I used to be afraid all the time, but your group helped me. I don't feel so alone anymore." Malik felt his heart swell and he smiled warmly. "I'm glad you're here," he replied. "You're a part of this too. You're helping make this school a better place." As the boy walked away, Malik felt an overwhelming sense of fulfillment. This was what he had worked for, what he and his friends had sacrificed so much for. Every small victory, every connection made was proof that they were creating something meaningful, something that would last long after they had all moved on. By the end of the school year, Malik's story had reached beyond the walls of the school. The local newspaper ran a feature on the peer support group, praising their efforts to create a more compassionate, inclusive community. Students from other schools began reaching out, asking Malik for advice on starting similar groups. What had once been a single act of courage had transformed into a movement, and Malik was amazed by the ripple effect that had spread from his decision to stand up for Jamal all those months ago. On the last day of school, Malik and his friends gathered in the empty classroom where they had held their first peer group meeting. Jamal, Trina, and others who had joined them on this journey sat around, reminiscing about the challenges they had faced and the triumphs they had achieved. "Can you believe how far we've come?" Trina said, grinning. "Feels like a lifetime ago." Malik smiled, nodding. "It all started with a choice. I didn't think it would lead to all of this." Jamal placed a hand on Malik's shoulder, his voice filled with gratitude. "None of us did. But you showed us what was possible, Malik. You taught us to believe in ourselves." Malik looked around at his friends, feeling a warmth that was almost overwhelming. "We did this together, all of us. I couldn't have done it without you." They laughed, sharing stories and memories, their voices echoing in the empty room. The bond they had formed was unbreakable, a testament to the power of friendship and resilience. As they said their goodbyes, Malik felt a bittersweet pang, knowing that they were moving on to new chapters in their lives. But he also felt an immense sense of pride. They had created something that would outlast them, something that would continue to inspire future students. Malik walked home that day with a heart full of gratitude and a mind full of dreams. He knew that the journey wasn't over. There would be new challenges, new opportunities to make a difference. But he was ready for whatever came next because he had discovered a strength within himself that no one could take away. And he knew that no matter where life took him, he would carry this experience with him, a reminder of the power of one voice, one choice, and the courage to stand up and be heard. As summer arrived and school ended, Malik found himself reflecting on how much his life and his sense of self had changed over the past year. Everything had begun with a choice to stand up for his friend, a choice that had led him to face his fears, to challenge the status quo, and ultimately to bring a community together. But even now, as the season shifted and the final chapter of middle school closed, Malik felt that this journey had only just begun. In late August, Malik received a letter from the school district. His hands trembled as he opened it, recognizing the district's seal on the envelope. To his amazement, it was an invitation to speak at a regional education summit about the impact of peer-led support groups on student well-being. Educators and students from around the state would attend, eager to learn from his experience. When Malik shared the news with his family, they were overjoyed. His mother hugged him, tears in her eyes, and his father clapped him on the back with pride. The summit would be held just before the new school year started, giving Malik a final chance to reflect on his experience and share what he'd learned with others. On the day of the summit, Malik stood backstage, clutching a microphone and reviewing his speech. His nerves fluttered, but he focused on the message he wanted to share. That real change began with courage, with the willingness to take that first step, even when the road ahead seemed daunting. As he walked onto the stage, the bright lights shone down on him, and he felt a surge of both excitement and gratitude. He glanced at the crowd, noticing the faces of teachers, parents, and students, all listening intently. Jamal and Trina sat in the front row, their expressions filled with pride and encouragement. Malik took a deep breath, grounding himself as he began to speak. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Malik Thompson, and a year ago, I didn't think my voice mattered. I was just a kid trying to make it through the day, trying to stay out of trouble and avoid the people who made school feel like a nightmare. He paused, letting his words settle over the audience. But then something changed. I realized that staying quiet, staying invisible, wasn't enough, not for me, and not for the friends I cared about. So I made a choice. I chose to stand up, not because I thought I was brave, but because I was tired of feeling powerless. And that choice set off a chain reaction, one that helped transform my school and brought us all closer together. Malik shared the story of the peer support group, the initial resistance, and the way they had persevered. He spoke about the challenges they had faced, the fear and uncertainty, but also the moments of triumph and connection. He described how his friends had lifted him up, how they had become each other's source of strength and resilience. Everyone deserves to feel safe and valued, he continued. Everyone deserves a place where they can be themselves, where they can find friendship and support. And that's something we can all create together, one step at a time. He finished his speech to a standing ovation, the applause ringing out as he stepped back from the podium. Malik's heart swelled as he glanced at Jamal and Trina, who were cheering louder than anyone else. In that moment, he felt a sense of fulfillment beyond anything he'd ever imagined. After the summit, Malik returned to school with a renewed sense of purpose. The peer support group continued, expanding to welcome the new students who joined each year. Malik, Jamal, Trina, and the other original members took on leadership roles, mentoring younger students and guiding them in building a community rooted in kindness and respect. Dante, too, had become part of the group. His journey hadn't been easy, and there were moments when he struggled to shake off the habits of his past. But with Malik's encouragement and the support of the group, he found a new path forward. Dante learned to express himself without anger, to lean on his friends rather than isolate himself. Slowly, he became an advocate for the very cause he had once opposed. One day, Malik found Dante sitting with a few younger students, sharing his own story of transformation and encouraging them to stand up for themselves and others. Malik felt a surge of pride as he watched his former adversary give back to the community they had created. It was a reminder of how far they had come and the power of redemption when given a second chance. The group's work soon gained attention beyond their school. Other schools in the district began forming peer-led support groups inspired by Malik's story and the success of his efforts. Teachers from different schools visited, asking for guidance on how to implement similar programs. Malik even received letters from students he'd never met, thanking him for showing them what was possible. As graduation approached, Malik reflected on the journey he had taken. The school held a ceremony to honor the peer group's impact, inviting Malik to speak one last time. Standing on the stage before his classmates, teachers, and family, he felt both nostalgic and hopeful. "We started something here," he said, his voice steady and filled with emotion. "But this isn't the end. It's only the beginning. Wherever we go, whatever we do, we can take this spirit with us. We can create communities of respect and kindness, places where people lift each other up instead of tearing each other down. That's something we can carry with us for the rest of our lives." The crowd erupted in applause, and Malik felt the weight of their support wrap around him like a warm embrace. As he left the stage, he was met by his friends, all of them beaming with pride. Later that night, as Malik sat on his porch under the stars, Jamal joined him, handing him a soda and settling into the seat beside him. "Can you believe we're finally done?" Jamal asked, his voice filled with wonder. Malik chuckled, shaking his head. "Feels surreal, doesn't it?" Jamal nodded, his expression thoughtful. "You changed everything, Malik, not just for me, but for all of us. I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't stood up that day." Malik looked out at the night sky, feeling a deep sense of peace. "It wasn't just me, Jamal. It was all of us. We all made this happen." As they sat together talking about the future and reminiscing on their journey, Malik felt a profound gratitude for the friendships he had forged and the strength they had discovered in each other. He knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, he would face them with courage and integrity, guided by the lessons he had learned and the people who had stood by him. In the end, Malik understood that true heroism wasn't about being fearless or perfect. It was about choosing to act, even in the face of fear. It was about lifting others up, believing in their potential and standing together. And he knew, as he looked at the stars, that he would carry this experience with him for the rest of his life, a reminder that one voice, one choice, truly could change the world.